So proof of concept that an Android game console for the television would resonate with gamers and developers, proof of hardware that we could build something that provided a great gaming experience on a mobile chipset, and proof of audience that developers would come and gamers would come when we didn't have millions of units to promise as far as a deep install base. And I think we blew away all of our goals as related to that.
This is Julie Ehrman. She was the CEO of Ouya Inc., the company behind the Kickstarter legend, the Ouya. Now, the Ouya itself released to a massive response on Kickstarter, raising over $8.5 million, while also attracting further capital from investors. The console was a small box that sat upright and ran on an Android-based operating system, leveraging a Tegra 3 mobile processor at its core. If you mention the Ouya now, it's viewed as a joke and has become part of meme culture online. Think about all the comparisons the Atari VCS was drawing to the Ouya when it was announced. Usually if a person calls your console the next Ouya, it's not a good thing or a compliment. At this time, Julie Ehrman has moved on since the Ouya brand was bought by Razer, and she now works as president of media at Playboy. The failures of the Ouya can be drawn to a number of problems, whether it was positioning itself as an indie game console at a time where indies needed a system only to have the other consoles begin embracing indies years later. We could also see a disconnect between the people developing and running the Ouya company and the gaming space as a whole. Here's an infamous example of Julie speaking during an interview at South by Southwest, where Julie speaks about the Ouya controller. See if you can spot the lack of research of their direct competitors.
They built Papa and Yo. That actually leverages the buttons and the touchpad, right? Because our controller has a touchpad. You're not going to find that somewhere else.
Yep, you heard that right. She believed at the time that no other device had a controller with a touchpad, while the interviewer Josh Topolsky was quick to remind her about the PS4.
And the reality is...
The new PlayStation 4 controller has a touchpad,
That's true. They could build it for that.
So
beyond this, however, the Kickstarter was delayed. When products arrived, people were not happy with the controller, and indie developers slowly left the system as sales appeared to slow. After Razer bought Ouya, not much has been done with the brand, and we all pretty much now figure the Ouya will never appear again. Instead, it will act as a reminder to how hard the game console space is to enter despite having millions of dollars. So now the real question, who is still buying these systems? If you look online, they still sell regularly on eBay and Amazon for $50 and up. This is the same system that showed buyers an interesting UI during the Kickstarter pitch, only to change it in the final product. The same system that has a bad enough Wi-Fi connection to warrant an entire subreddit dedicated to picking out a power line adapter for it. So who in their right mind is buying these?
Yeah, it was me. So I finally do have an Ouya, and when it came out, I actually did not get one. This is the first Ouya I've had, which is probably a good thing since I missed out on the whole craze back then where it looked very promising, and then, well, it didn't work out very well. And in fact, now I don't really see a reason to buy an Ouya when there are devices like the NVIDIA Shield TV, for example. It does a much better job, and while it's a little more expensive, it's just a better overall product. This is something we'll take a look at in a future episode, so if you want to see my take on that, I guess subscribe to get updated on that one. But today we're going to be looking at the Ouya, and I mostly wanted to unbox it and open it up and just take a look around the system. I've never used the controller before, and that's supposed to be one of the worst parts about this product is the controller, so we'll open that up as well and take a look. This is a used product. It was used in box and everything. When I did actually play this when it was out because one of my friends had it, but they had actually at the time synced up their PlayStation 3 controller. I believe it was either PS3 or PS4. I'm pretty sure it was PS3 controller, and they were using that. They didn't even touch the stock controller outside of setting it up and then getting their PS3 controller synced up. So that bodes well for the controller that's in here right now. Okay, so we have the box here. Free the games. Game console controller. The idea was that every game was supposed to have a free trial of some kind, and that actually didn't work out because there are some games that don't have that. Actually, I think like half the games don't actually allow you to trial them, but some do. Some do. The UI changed from what they originally showed to then, which is it's a very simple UI. There's not a lot going on, which some people might enjoy that, but I don't even think it's great to navigate. One of their biggest things that they pushed was Final Fantasy 3, which is on Steam and everything now. It was on phones, and they kept pushing that, oh, it's gonna be on the TV now. Now, of course, there are a lot of little set-top boxes you can get that are pretty strong as well. So let's go ahead and open this guy up. There's a nice little look at our controller and the console on the side there too. And the top's just Ouya. So here we go, we open it up, and yep, we're greeted with our controller and our system. It looks like they actually have the plastic still on. There's a chance that they maybe never even took it off because I don't think you have to really do much to hook it up or anything. And it looks like we have hex screws at the top there, so I guess that's what we'll fight with to get open. Let's take a look around it. We have this rubber feet here that are supposed to keep it from... Yeah, she does a pretty good job. On the back we have power, micro USB it looks like, full HDMI, USB Type A, and then we have an Ethernet port. You see that, Nintendo? Ethernet. Nintendo, are you seeing this? Ethernet. Yeah, so the system itself, not a lot going on. Feels kind of nice, actually. I mean, it's at least heavy for what it is. It doesn't have a lot of stuff going on. So here we go. We're gonna grab the controller, and this is where I've heard that it's not great. Okay. I mean, I guess it needs batteries too. There's like a tape around it, I guess. Oh man. Okay, so this is not a very comfortable controller right away. I can tell the D-pad's very stiff too. Oh, that's a shame. Okay, so the shoulder buttons feel very bad. I do not like the feel of those. Those are tactile and these are, I guess they're supposed to be analog. These do not feel great up here. Initial impression is that this feels very cheap. But I don't think it has the batteries in it. So let me see if this thing even came with batteries. I think this is like used, like new, like new condition. So maybe it has, look at that, they didn't even take the batteries out. So maybe they didn't use the controller either. Maybe this is a model that like got returned or something to a store, because it still has the batteries like in its plastic and everything. Then we have our power cable that is not like a USB type power cable where they like, have a brick and then a USB cable to it. It is just straight up power cord to the back, and it is a 12 volt 1.5 amp. So that's actually a decent amperage for what is basically a Tegra 3. A Tegra 3 appeared in tablets like the Nexus 7 had a Tegra 3, and I think there was a few other tablets that had them. But I believe at the time they didn't put them in phones because it didn't actually work with the, I guess just the protocols that our different towers would use here in the US, for example. I think it came later for like the Tegra line. But it mostly found its way into tablets, and for this, little set-top box like the Ouya, which was interesting because it came in at a bad time because the Tegra was still evolving rapidly. Here's our HDMI cable. I think if the Ouya came around now, because the Tegra has slowed with its evolution, it probably would have been better. By the time this thing was like really shipping, the Tegra 4 was already being talked about and coming out. So this thing was outdated as soon as it shipped. All right, so when I removed all the plastics from the top, just to make sure I wasn't missing anything and it was getting caught, it's not. It feels kind of bad. Like there's still more plastic on there. This plastic is like the worst to get off here. It keeps breaking apart. I don't know if it's because it's older now, since it's been a couple years, but that wasn't great. It doesn't feel great. These back shoulder buttons would really annoy me over time. They don't feel responsive at all. Let's see. Now I gotta put the batteries in, and for I remember these front parts have to come off to get it in there. So these look like they pull off. One battery I guess goes in there, and the other battery is gonna go in here. And it seems that would add weight to it. One thing I'm noticing is it's very light. I assume when you start putting these batteries in, it will actually become heavier since you have one in basically in each hand, essentially a AA. So I guess that would help, but still, just the buttons themselves don't feel great. I think the joysticks are okay. They feel at least have a good float like movement to them. The D-pad's not good. The D-pad's very bad. These are like the worst part of it though, are these shoulder buttons. So let's actually start taking it apart though. Thankfully, it's all Phillips heads from what I can see right now, so much easier than what I usually have to get into. I mean, I got meant to use hex screws on the system itself. So let's go ahead and take all these out and I guess take a look inside the controller. So all the screws out, this guy just kind of pops apart there. Two of the screws are actually stuck in here because there appear to be magnets. There appear to be, because it's like even my screwdriver sticking to it. 1, 2, 3, 4 magnets. The screw got pretty much jumped to one of these. But there are 4 different magnets here in each corner. So from what I could tell, I guess the magnets are there to hold on to these covers. So these covers, they actually just use screws, by the way, here. So they just use 4 screws in here, and that way when you go to cover it, I guess it'll jump to it like that. However, it clicks in really badly at the top, and it's kind of hard to get out. So they basically used magnets that are kind of cheap, and again, they just use screws on this side. So they probably could have done a better job with it for fitting. I think that's the biggest issue here, is that it doesn't fit great. So it's kind of a pain to get out. But I mean, I guess that's decent thinking, like some actual ingenuity to come up with that. So that's at least interesting enough. So the controller's out now. These are springs, and that's why they feel so bad. Very loose springs on these bumpers. That's why they don't have a great feel to them. Very mushy feeling. And it has a lot to do, I would say, with those springs that are there. So now we have to pull this part out, and we should be able to at least take a look at the front of the board. So we have our board out now, and to be honest, this is not the worst built controller inside from what I'm seeing. This is kind of annoying to have these guys floating off, but I think the idea, again, was to put some weight in the handles and just have the batteries double as that, because you're going to need batteries in it no matter what. So they'll just kind of double as extra weights down there. I'm looking at this controller, though. The boards are pretty thick, the PCB boards. They're not bad. They're stacked here, so we have one stacked on top of the other. We have our Bluetooth or antenna right up here, which is funny because this thing had like connectivity issues. And I'm looking at this. The only thing I could think of that would be messing with the connectivity on this is pretty much right behind where the antenna is this guy. And I think that's just a big chunk of metal that is just acting as a weight. That's the only thing I could think that would be there for, because if I take this out, let me see, like this almost touches that antenna. Like it's very, very close. Yeah, this is just a weight. That's all it is. If I drop it, it's just a weight, and it sits right up against where that antenna is, and it's just in the back. So that's the only thing I could really look at and say, okay, maybe that was messing with it. I wonder if you took this weight out, it would be very light then, by the way, because this is actually some weight to it. I wonder if the connectivity would have been better for it, because that's the only thing that's really, I can see that could be interfering with it. Otherwise, though, it's just basically plastic on the top and nothing else, unless they just have a bad antenna or just a terrible design on the system, because I know there are Wi-Fi issues as well. But I have to say, at least just looking at this, I mean, they even have similar joysticks from what I'm seeing to what, like, the 360, for example, and the Xbox One have. Like, this is not a bad board or anything internally, but, like, the shoulder buttons are borderline unforgivable, and I would assume that this weight in the back would probably be affecting the antenna, and that's why you have input connection issues. So I at least understand why people don't like the controller. It's not a great thing to use when there are better options with Ouya that of course allows you to connect things like a PlayStation 3 or PlayStation 4 controller. I think even 360 controllers work on it. So now let's actually open up the system and take a look inside this guy. It's pretty small, and I figure we'll go ahead and weigh it too. Okay, so this guy set up here. I have it set to grams, and we'll get hopefully an accurate reading on this guy. 309 grams, which is, I guess that is a bit heavier than something like the Xbox One Elite controller, for example. So it's not that much heavier than something like an Xbox One Elite controller. So it's a very, very light system. In fact, if I remember right, I believe that they used weights even in this system to try to make it feel heavier. And without the weights, it probably would feel the same weight as something like an Xbox One controller. We have 4 screws on the top that appear to be hex screws, so why don't we go ahead and undo those, and I think this thing just comes right apart. Okay, so I got all 4 of those out, and it just pops off the side, and we can look directly at our board now. It's like right there. I do remember that some of the early complaints included, yeah, I guess that's how you have the LED right there to light up. It has a little diffuser there so that the top lights up. I believe a lot of the complaints were that the fan, for some of them, were just floating around in here, like it just fell off completely. So I guess we'll see how secure that is as well. I don't know if much is really nope. Okay, so nothing was holding this down at all. This is the entire board right here for the Ouya. It reminds me when I look at it as like a Raspberry Pi board. I think this is a little smaller though, believe it or not. Very nice heatsink. Very large heatsink with a fan directly on top, which is good. And yes, if you look down here, a large weight is actually in there. How about we do this? Let me go ahead and I'm gonna take the weight out, and we'll see how much the weight is that's down here, and it'll tell us about how much they had to add to the system, because it might have not been. So that you have to plug in cables in the back, and if it's not heavy enough, the cables would probably take it with it, like when you plug it in. So they probably had to put a large weight at the bottom so that it wouldn't go flying when you do that. And oh, actually there's multiple weights down here. How many weights do they have in this thing? Wow, okay. So there are several weights that they put in the bottom of this thing. Five weights and then 2 screws, which probably don't make up for a ton of weight. But why don't we double check very quickly how much these weights actually are, and how much I guess heft they add to the system. So let me turn this guy back on. We'll get a measure in grams. That'll of course tell us let's see. So they added 58 grams worth of weight to the bottom of it, which means this thing would have been like 250 grams without these weights. And I can see why they wanted to do that because, yeah, it probably would have been pulled by those cables and it would have had a hard time. So I get why they did that. It's just really funny to think that this board is so light, they had to add actual weights to the bottom of it. The fan's only really held on by 4 screws here, Phillips head screws, so I should be able to take these off. The thing I'm noticing though is they actually mounted the heatsink with what appears to be, I'm going to pull this fan off and see, but it almost looks like they're not push pins, they actually soldered it through the board. So you can't actually get the heatsink off easily. We're still going to go ahead and try to do it, but it doesn't come off easily. The fan is plugged in there, and that's our entire fan here. It's probably, believe it or not, replaceable with a nicer one. Because I don't know how people said that this can get kind of loud, but it should be replaceable with a different type of fan if you really want it to be nicer. However, this is a Tegra 3. I don't think it's going to get super hot, but comparative to like obviously bigger processors, for example. Let's see if I can work this heatsink off so we can pretty much have a good look at the board and the Tegra. All right, so looking at this, they decided to solder the heatsink to the board, which is really annoying to work with. We're going to do it here though, because I want to take a look at the Tegra underneath the heatsink, and we're going to use a desoldering tool, some solder, and a cleaning mesh pretty much on this guy to try to get it off there. But if you ever run into a heatsink that is soldered, it is not fun because the heatsink fights you the entire way because, of course, the heatsink's job is to pull heat away from the chip, and we're trying to put heat on that heatsink. So let's see what we can do here with this guy. Now, I kind of started on this one already, and then I have 3 posts total. I didn't see a 4th one in this corner, so I think there's just that one, that one, and that one. And we're going to actually use this guy to try to suck solder away from it and then hopefully break it loose. So the reason I add solder is because I have leaded solder that melts at a lower temperature than the unleaded that's already there. So basically I like to add a little bit of solder, heat up the area after I've added solder to help it, and then suction it out of there. And you can actually see it's already pulling it away pretty well. And I basically just want to loosen the pegs until they can move freely, and then I should be able to, at that point, hopefully pull the heatsink off or kind of break it free. So I've already done this one, I just did that one, and we're going to start to loosen this guy up, and basically I'm going to go around, well, she came out nice, until it is very, very loose, and I can hopefully pull that heatsink away. I didn't see any solder on the other side, so I think it's literally just soldered on this one side, and after it's broken free, I should be able to just pop the heatsink off. So I managed to weaken this leg so far. That is actually trying to get out of there, so I still need to weaken this one, and we should be good. All right, so they're all weakened and it's now off. Looks like I just had a thermal pad under here, which is generally what you'll do for like a Tegra. Tablets and stuff would do the same thing. So we do have that off now. We can take a look at what I believe to be our RAM. We have 1 GB of DDR3 memory, and then we have our Tegra chip right there. It's our Tegra 3. And at the time, they were able to put the Tegra 3 in, that's from the thermal pad, okay. That's not blood, that's thermal pad. They were able to put the Tegra 3 in here and then cool it with a fan, which was great because we got good thermals out of it compared to what tablets would do with the Tegra 3. And it was a good way to kind of show off what the Tegra 3 could do. The only issue with it was that, again, the Tegra 4 was out, and we really all wanted to see something like the Tegra 4 in one of these, but they had already kind of fallen behind and they had to ship it out. So the Tegra 3 was going out in these Ouyas when the Tegra 4 was hitting the market. So yes, this was outdated very, very quickly. If they made it now and did like an X1, you know, maybe it'd be a little more interesting, but we have the Shield TV for that. So if I really look at this, this is kind of the predecessor to the NVIDIA Shield TV, with the NVIDIA Shield TV being way more capable of emulators and programs and games and everything. This is unfortunately a bit weak for today's market, but it was a really cool idea and proof of concept at the time. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Ouya. Yes, I bought one in 2019. We took it apart. We took a look at it. I wasn't expecting to have to desolder the heatsink, but there you have it. Usually for heatsinks, you'll have like tabs that push through, like plastic push tabs. I assume this was able to save them a bit of money to have these standoffs and it's soldered in. Generally, you don't have to remove these for something that's lower powered like a Tegra 3 because it's not going to like wear out thermal compound or anything, and they just use these pads. This one is still, by the way, very squishy, so no issues there or anything. But really, I look at the Ouya as, again, a proof of concept, something that came a bit too early for the Tegra market that was rapidly evolving. If it showed up now, it'd be kind of cool, but like I said, NVIDIA Shield TV is probably what you'd want to get if you want to get into something like this, but much more horsepower behind it. Let me know what you guys think about the Ouya. I'm curious if any of you bought one when it came out, if you were following it up to its release, and if you felt kind of burned based on the final product. Interesting stuff. One of the biggest Kickstarters that's ever been, and then it kind of fizzled out in a few years, but it's a Kickstarter project, it tends to happen. Thanks guys for watching, and make sure you like the video if you liked it, dislike it if not. Guys, I'll see you in the next video.